So with the addition of the new Cinderhulk item, tank junglers have been introduced into the meta. But it seems that top laners have also caught on to the new Cinderhulk and started running teleport with Smite. So if you want to have some freelo in your solo queue games, or perhaps understand what's going to happen in a lot of competitive games that will be upcoming, watch this video and learn a little bit about the new shift in the meta. Now, the idea came from top laners before not running in Escape Summoner, particularly Hecarim and Fizz running Ignite, which means that they are a little bit more vulnerable in the early game, but they are really strong in the 1v1 and the 2v2, but are just a little bit more vulnerable to the gank. So how do you get these champions to get out of the laning phase without being ganked? Well, the solution has been showcased in a lot of games in where top laners will begin the game by jungling instead of actually being in lane. So they'll jungle, do one camp, hit level 2 off the camp, teleport to the top lane, and then they're a little bit tankier, they have more levels, they have more sustain, so even if they get ganked, they can stay in the lane a little bit further because of the reduced cooldown of teleport when you use it into a tower. So experimenting with this leads to the idea of, oh, why not instead of running Ignite or Flash, let's just run Smite. So now you can jungle faster. So you don't even need to teleport into the lane, or even if you teleport, there isn't really any counterplay, because before what people used to do was they would just push the wave if you knew the opponent was actually doing an entire camp, so that you deny the entire first wave to the cannon and then reset, and you'd just be a tiny little bit behind, as opposed to not pushing the entire wave to the tower, while the other guy can just teleport freely and not miss out on that much of an experience. So that idea came about, but with the introduction of Cinderhulk and tank top laners being played all around, it became beneficial for top laners to run Smite now. And the only downside to this, by the way, the only downside is not running Flash. That's it. There is nothing else. That is the only downside to this strategy. So, what does it mean to take Smite on your top laner? Well, it gives you a lot of things and very little, as we mentioned. Only downside, no Flash. If you know how to play without that, then you are golden. So, your level 1 has faster jungler, which means that you will not miss as much experience if you choose to take a camp early, which you obviously should. Next, if you 2v1 the lane, you will have faster jungling because you have 2 smites. On top of that, you will have faster dragon control, particularly in any lane swap scenario. You will just be higher level than your opponent because of how quickly you can jungle instead. Secondly, there's so many good points about this. Anyways, you gain access to all the buff passives, which are the top line, which doubles doesn't really do anything for you if you're laning, but the important ones are going to be Gromp. This is one that's going to scale into the late game, and it's essentially a Thornmail, incredibly broken right now because it scales off of your maximum HP, which works into Cinderhulk. Cinderhulk gives you 25% bonus HP, and it's incredibly powerful right now. You gotta use this item. So, by smiting Gromp, you deal a lot more damage based on how your levels are going. Really good right now, particularly in the late game combo with a Thornmail versus champions that don't have magic resist. Super strong. You can practically 1v5 on certain champions. It also gives you increased jungle control in other aspects, in the sense that the top laner can now control the Scuttle Crab by himself, and you can have full river control between your jungler and your top laner because you can both be on the ball in controlling the Scuttle Crab. Then you can also have better cheese ability for, say, 2-man A Baron with a top lane and jungle with 2 smites, essentially 4 smite charges if you actually hold yourself off, because the cooldown is only 14 seconds between charges. Really powerful stuff. Also in the dragon fight, you can also have up to 4 smite charges in any fight between 2 tanks, which means you can either burst down the dragon, and if the fight lasts long enough, which will more than likely will because of how tanky you are, you can have 2 smite charges, one for each, one for the jungler, one for the tank, to use on other carries and reduce the damage that you take by quite a bit. Then you also have extra gold being fueled into the top laner because they get more gold from clearing the camps because they have a machete or a machete upgrade, which gives you up to 30 more gold on each camp. So they can alternate between crab doubles, crab gromp, or any other wolf or wraith or anything that they're taking really, and just gain more gold than the jungler themselves. So they will become one of the higher gold generators in the team. You also have the ability to you just become another jungler. I'm sorry, I just I was looking at my notes. I covered all the points. It's so good, you gotta try it. So you get full on jungle control, and the way that you want to play this out is going to be on high mobility champions that scale really hard into the late game and that are a little bit difficult to gank. So right now, the number one of these guys is Shyvana. So she's really tanky. Her passive gives her armor and magic resist. Her W gives her movement speed. Her ultimate makes her even harder to gank. And the challenging smite makes her super difficult. She can push really fast, and more importantly, she's very mobile and can clear jungle very quickly, which gives her the ability to use smite often and effectively, particularly in counter jungling as well, because you can just sneak into the red buff. You need only a couple of seconds with it, bam, in and out, you're done. You got a free red buff from the enemy, or you got a new blue buff. And in solo queue, the way that you're going to want to use this is passively in the early game. So you're vulnerable to ganks, and that's really the only time that you're going to be suffering or struggling, is because in the early phases you're weak. The smite doesn't do anything for you aside from getting you the ground passive, or if you don't even get ground passive, it'll wear off and you're not going to be able to do all that much, especially against a guy that has flash. So you can be outplayed, so you have to farm up a little bit. And once you get levels, then once you finish your Skirmisher Sabre with the Cinderhulk and start ranking up those items, then you are un-1v1able, and if you're super mobile, then you can just go into the enemy's jungle, take some camp, go down to dragon, perhaps solo it if you will. That's another option. Just have the top laner go top, jungler is bottom lane, he takes the dragon now. So in a lane swap scenario, you'd be super deadly. But in solo queue, you want to be just split pushing all day and wreaking havoc, or is it wreaking? Just causing a lot of mayhem in the enemy, and making sure that they try to address your pressure of split pushing and then just grouping while taking the junglers. Oh, you go for a flank, oh, it doesn't matter, take the jungle, go back to the lane, and just be constantly farming and becoming a late game god. Now, why this is super strong is because in solo queue, the strategy is rather one-dimensional. It's only split pushing, right? It's not really that big a deal. But in competitive, when you can also coordinate these two hyper tanks with possibly Skirmisher Sabre, it becomes a whole nother monster, because a coordinated team is very scary, particularly one that is coordinated in making efforts around counter jungling and denying objectives and objectives in the jungle, as well as tracking and Baron. So anything from starting in the enemy's jungle and even for buffing an opponent is now possible because of two smites. So you can just have the one jungler solo this camp, the other one goes invade while the support stops someone else, and then you regroup for the other one. You 2v1 swap, and then you just do a really early dragon, things like that. Just accelerate the objective game around jungle control really by a large margin. The other important thing, though, is that in a competitive environment, a team will recognize that, okay, you know what, similar to a Hecarim with Ignite or a Fizz with Ignite, you want to gank this lane early, because if they fall far behind, then they're not going to be as useful and they're not going to be able to be off a leash. So you want to keep them tied down. But if you're the team running these kind of champions, you need to understand that how to make this work. And you make these champions work without an escape summoner work by two options. And obviously you can just kind of lane it out and hope that you don't get ganked, play passively. That works perfectly fine, but you're in danger. The best ways to do this are going to be with lane swaps, and this is the reason why. The first one is you go for a lane swap, and then you take the first tower early. You 4-man or 3-man push a tower early, creating a really long lane. And what you want to do with creating this really long lane is make sure that the wave pushes into the opponent's jungle, pushes into the opponent tower, and it doesn't even matter if it's frozen, because what your top laner is going to want to do is now just take over that side of the jungle. Okay, you freeze my lane, that's fine, I'm just going to go take your jungle instead, and create a lot of pressure that way, because instead of him being starved, the starvation is now passed on to the enemy's jungler, to the guy that's freezing, to the guy that's on the team that's freezing the wave. So somebody has to respond to this guy counter jungling, or it's going to be a huge problem because he's not falling behind. It's now the jungler that's falling behind. The next option is going to be to just create a regular lane swap and more than likely just do a jungle for a little bit, or just kind of babysit the other person with a support until they have a couple of levels, have a couple of items. More than likely like a level 3 to level 4 is fine, so that you can get all your abilities, and now you have the abilities that you need to escape any sorts of ganks. So then you swap the lanes back, and then you have 2 top laners that are super tanky that will more than likely not be ganked because they're already at the items that they need. And speaking of items that they need, the Skirmisher, Sabre, Cinderhulk that costs only 22,250 gold, 350 gold less than Sunfire, is infinitely more cost effective, also happens to have an amazing build path. Any top laner right now, with the exception of mages, can start with a ruby crystal, so it's not a problem to start that item. You can upgrade it into Bami Cinder for only 600 gold, which is pretty much nothing for a first back. And then the machete costs only 300. The upgrade costs 450 from machete to an actual skirmisher saber. So 750 gold being spent with a tiny combined cost once you finish them both means that this item at 2250 is always good to have as a first item. It's not a problem to buy it so quickly. So it generates so much pressure, and there's such little counterplay that if played correctly, you're gonna see a lot of results. And the champions that you want to do this on are things that are really mobile, that scale hard into the late game, that you will build a lot of HP on, and that will just be able to stick to champions in a team fight. So the ones that I wrote down are a little bit odd, but try them out, then you'll see why I wrote them down. First one is the top of the list, of course, Shyvana. Best one of all of them, really, because she's incredibly mobile, is excellent at clearing the jungle, and offers an unrivaled late game presence. Then you have Rek'Sai, super mobile as well, is a jungler, which means that her jungling ability is going to be really strong. She's not as strong as Shyvana in the late game team fights, but she is a menace in the mid game because of how well she can split push, and how well she can answer any other split push. So she can deal with anybody that also has Smite. Maybe not so much as Shyvana, but she's really strong in that sense. Then you have your obvious ones, your Fizz, your Hecarim. Gragas is one that I'd like to see this being done more. I mean, Gragas right now being a super strong jungler. He's also a good top laner with this item because he essentially becomes just the exact same role that he fulfilled in the jungle, except with more gold. So he reaches those item spikes a little bit sooner. And then champions like Mundo and whatnot. But Mundo's a little bit weaker in the early game, and I don't think that he necessarily needs this. But he does become tankier. A Mundo with Smite is tankier than the Mundo without it and deals more damage because of ground passive and because of Skirmisher Saber and the HP boost to him. So that's the way that you want to play in solo queue, in the competitive way with the 2v1. And just as a reminder, in the solo queue environment, you just want to split push. You don't want to do anything else. You want to be the guy that's, oh man, my buff spawned and I'm not there at 10 seconds. He's already there. He already took it. I'm not even going to bother checking because I know this asshole has been on my buffs every second. You want to be that guy. That's how you want to play this out. You want to be the one that's like, oh god, there's no jungle left. Like, he's taking every single camp possible while maintaining lane pressure, while pushing. You can't 1v1 him. You can't gank him anymore. He'll just turn. He'll run away. And also, one more thing about why Shiv is so good with this, that all other top laners lack, is that she kills tanks faster than anybody else because her E gives her percentage damage on maximum health, and Blade of the Ruined King is almost a core item on her, which means that you have 2 sources of dealing with tanks now, and it is awesome. She's super strong with this, and I highly recommend that you play this style out, but you're gonna struggle a little bit in the beginning. It's not necessarily easy. So experiment with this, and let me know what you thought of this. Like, seriously, try it out. We're probably going to see this style being played out in a lot of regions, particularly the NA LCS. It's really strong. So thank you for watching, And if you have any ideas for future videos, feel free to let me know. I'd love to do any coherent ideas that you guys have out there.